The second of the lectures on Goffman's interaction ritual. Again, I'm using a very old and rapidly decaying, probably original paperback of the darn thing. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and just to say that the pagination of the following papers actually comes from the original printing of this article in the American Anthropologist in 1956. So this is different pagination than the book itself. But I'll just try to frame this again. This is true of the whole book, is that Durkheim's famous cult of the individual first developed in the division of labor, where Durkheim argues that the modern society essentially depends upon the development of organic solidarity, and which means the division of labor coupled with something like a sense of sacredness of the self. So that in our time, really the only major new category of law that's emerged in modernity is civil rights. And civil rights ensures something like, is aimed at creating and maintaining something like a liberal order. An order where people can rise and can move into professions and so on that they wish, and can do what they need to in order to perform well in the functions that they're pursuing. Okay, so the soul of the individual's personality, can be seen as one apportionment of the collective mana. The rites performed to representations of the social collectivity will sometimes be performed to the individual himself. So this is page 473. So in the original. So this is early on in the chapter in the book. So Goffman is taking Durkheim, the cult of the individual, and recognizing that whatever we are derivatives of the collective, right? That the collective comes first prior to us, and that we as individuals attain social self, the spiritual social thing that we animate, right? And that animates us from the collective, okay? And that the rites that we perform, the rituals that we perform, the interaction rituals that we perform in everyday life, right, are things that are not aimed at honoring the collective necessarily, but often are aimed at honoring the distributed piece of the collective, the self. So these are interaction rituals that honor selves. Now, in so doing, they also, honor the ritual order of the modern world, but directly the first, the immediate sort of icon that we're honoring and worshiping is the self. So Goffman proposes to examine how the person in our urban secular world is allotted a kind of sacredness that is displayed and confirmed by symbolic acts, page 473. Like Durkheim, Goffman wishes to see how individuals or persons, or even the very idea of individuality, come to possess or carry raw moral energy or social power, and the treatment that others accord to them as a result. So I like this essay. It's got quite a bit of power. We'll skip some of this stuff, and we'll skip some of this as well. So behavioral norms are more than customs. They are built of moral energy. So a rule of conduct may be defined as a guide for action, recommended not because it is pleasant, cheap, or effective, but because it is suitable or just. That's his term, right? And rules of conduct take forms of rights and obligations. We mostly follow these things out of mind or unwittingly, right? And the moral qualities of rules often become apparent only in retrospect when lapses occur. So it's only in the moments when we punish deviance that we actually become tangibly aware of the existence of the rules that were there all along, okay? All right, the maintenance of rules then projects and imputes an image of self. So the self that we have depends upon the maintenance of rules. And then there are vulnerabilities of self that emerge in everyday life in the moral order because the thing is simply made out of moral energy or social energy, because it's built out of other people's responses. The self is vulnerable. So when a rule of conduct is broken, we find that two individuals run the risk of becoming discredited, one with an obligation who should have governed himself by the rule, and the other with an expectation who should have been treated in a particular way because of this governance. So both actor and recipient are threatened. So these rules of conduct then are transformed into a moral order because they are punished when we deviate them. So rules of conduct, again, can be classed as symmetrical when people have mutuality. When you and I shake hands, we're engaged in a symmetrical rule of conduct. Asymmetrical is what the focus of this essay is. It's really where there are hierarchical differences or status differences. So in everyday life, we often recognize differences in status, hierarchy through ceremonial rules of conduct, right? All right, I'm just kind of skip some of this stuff. Yeah, we often take these as good manners. I'm going to skip some of this. So page 477, what is deference? So the first word in the title of the essay. So deference is a symbolic means by which appreciation is conveyed to a recipient of something of which this recipient is taken as a symbol, extension, or agent. So I kind of hate that. It's marks of devotion, celebrates and confirms relation to the recipient. Status rituals are interpersonal rituals, very much akin to religious rituals. Yeah. So basically what happens here is he claims that much of what we do when we meet everybody in the interaction order, the interaction rituals of everyday life, is we symbolically appreciate them. We give them some sign of appreciation. If it's symmetrical, we expect the same bowing or scraping or nodding or smiling or how are you driven back at us, right? It's symmetrical. But here again, he's going to be talking that many rituals are in everyday life are designed to indicate to both parties the relative status of each. And deference refers to the act of giving symbolic gestures, right? Just making gestures that indicate we know that someone else is above us in a status order, okay? So the individual may desire, earn, and deserve deference, but by and large, right, deference is where other people defer to us, right? So I'm a high-minded person, a high person of high status. I'm expecting people to defer to me. But deference is something that has to come from other people, right? We can't make them do it. They have to give it to us by and large, right? So you can't give it to yourself. You can't give yourself deference. You're forced to seek it from others. And seeking it from others, you find you've added a reason for seeking others out. And in turn, society is given added assurance that its members will enter into interaction relationships with one another. If the individual could give himself deference he desired, there might be a tendency for society to disintegrate into little islands inhabited by solitary cultish men, each in continuous worship at their own shrine. So again, sexist language, we don't need that, but his or her. So he's explaining that what society is that we enter out into society. We leave our homes, our enclaves, even during COVID, in order to go out into the world to get deference from other people. We want to get a face symbolically granted to us. Now I have an image I drew of that, if I can locate the thing. I always displace these things just in the moments before I begin a lecture. Here it is. Okay. All right. So here's deference and demeanor. So deference is a symbolic display of subordination, okay? That's deference. So bowing down, lying prostrate upon the ground, bowing, keeping ritual distance, right? Making sure you don't get too close to someone who's high status, thereby honoring that they have high status, that kind of thing, right? But it's all symbolizing to the other through gestures, right? We don't give them a sign, we don't give them words necessarily, we give them gestures of respect, right? I am not worthy, we say to the other. I am below you. I do not have your worth. I don't have your value, right? You're above me in the value hierarchy. And the demeanor refers to the willingness to stand or to sit and to receive the demeanor gestures or the demeanor rituals from someone, or the deference rituals from someone else. So a person with demeanor accepts the deference, thereby recognizing the lowly position of another. And I've talked about this in other recordings. But is that so? Deference and demeanor then refer to this sort of two-sided coin, the two sides of the gift exchange of gestures that establish both people in a position of ritual order. So in many ways, this is just like the lecture recording on Marcel Mauss's The Gift, where the gift passes back and forth between people. The gift itself disappears, but what's left behind are relationships. So too are these rituals of deference and demeanor. They're fleeting things; they go away. But what's left behind is the mutual recognition of relative position and the mutual recognition that each person has a sacred status in the moral order. Right? You are a person I must speak to, or I may speak to, and you grant me back the same moral status. In the previous video, we talked about shaming, shunning, and ostracism. We talked about Japanese mothers who engage in maternal ostracism, right, where they treat their children as though they do not exist. Those children don't get demeanor. Like, they can cry out and they could give symbolic gestures of deference to mother all day long, but mother isn't going to accept them. Mother is going to pretend that they don't even exist, right? So if you've ever been cold-shouldered or ostracized by people, or shamed or shunned by people, you get a sense of this, right? I mean, you're treated as though you are not there. So you're not granted a sacred position within the moral order. You instead are again, you're just a mere hunk of meat, an organ sac that's wandering around, no more significant than a fly, right? Okay, so there you are. So, yeah, so we can't give ourselves deference. We got to go out and find other people. We can't worship at our own shrine. We can't worship at our own shrine. We can't worship at our own altar. We got to find other people to do it. So we go out seeking people who need their altar worshipped. They need to be recognized and made sacred as a being of society, and then we seek them out to give us the same thing. So, so a personality disorder in many ways is refers to a person who has flaws in their capacity to be a sacred being in a ritual order. They either, they use it in a way other than to honor a society or to accomplish the normal ends. People who have a schizoid personality are probably able to worship at their own altar. They don't really need to go out into the world. They're people who truly are able to give themselves deference. People probably on the Asperger's spectrum or autism spectrum may be in the same position where the need for other people is diminished. Now, this isn't a problem, really. It's just a difference, right? It's a difference of the need for others to generate something like a sacred sense of self. They have the capacity to sort of generate it on their own. Some people like narcissists, malignant narcissism in particular, psychopaths, others, they actually are completely in need of other people to affirm their ritual conduct. Narcissists are notorious for seeking out the supply of energy to inflate their grandiose self from other people, right? So they're often like social monsters, walking about degrading other people, trying to get them to bow down before and recognize their innate superiority, right? So these are people who are monstrously dependent upon other people's worship. They can't leave others alone. They're constantly fussing with them in order to get their own inflated sense of self honored and worshiped. Okay, so deference continued. So displays of deference are often impersonal. It's not the person of the other, but the office or the moral order itself that is being upheld. There's asymmetrical deference, hierarchical displays, right? Symmetrical deference among social equals, the handshake, and so on. Deference displays not only respectful awe, but also trust, capacity for esteem, affection, belongingness, concern. That's all on page like 479. It's honorific. An idealized projection is often imposed, so that when you're projecting deference, it's not the actual hunk of meat in front of you, but rather an ideal image of the other that's being honored. Yeah. So deference communicates the regard for the other, but also promises a line of behavior, forthcoming behavior, and so on. Yeah. Okay. Enough of that. So deference is sometimes maintained or displayed through avoidance. So you recognize the superior position of an other, or simply recognize the sacred status of an other by avoiding them, by staying away from them. Don't contaminate them, right? You'd be ritually impure if you did. So the ideal sphere of the person of the other is avoided, accorded privacy. Avoid using personal tones or personal notes, first names, that kind of thing. Show respect by honoring the position. Familiarity is really defined as the absence of avoidance rituals and the capacity to sort of self approach. And you can even have asymmetrical familiarity here. Yeah, I'm just going to leave some of this behind. Deferential avoidance rituals are huge in the U.S. Something about that. I'm going to skip some of this because I think we just need to get on. If you wanted to read through, you could probably pause it and do it. Yeah, then there's, so in addition to avoidance rituals, there's also presentation rituals. So you're going up to another, giving them salutations, invitations, compliments, engaging in minor services. Again, these are acts of devotion demonstrating the ritual order, the sacredness of the other, the regard that you have for the other. Goffman identifies the parallel between Durkheim's positive and negative rites here. The negative rites are the ones of avoidance, the positive rites are the presentational ones. That's from, the elementary forms of religious life. Okay, so Durkheim then writes about the sacredness of the human personality. The human personality is a sacred thing. One dare not violate it, nor infringe its bounds, while at the same time the greatest good is in communion with others. Okay, so there you go. A long quote from a footnote: the sacred object inspires us, if not with fear, at least with respect. Keeps us at a distance. I'll kind of leave some of that behind. So to Durkheim and to, this is all from Durkheim. And then to Goffman here too, social power is rooted in annihilatory violence. Underneath this display of regard is often a need to keep the energies ritually contained. This is definitely in existence in the book Division of Labor, that if the moral energy streams aren't channeled appropriately, that they can break out in annihilatory violence towards others, and in the book Suicide, even towards the self. Okay, so demeanor is the element of the individual ceremonial behavior conveyed through deportment, dress, and bearing, which serves to express those in his immediate presence that a person of certified desirable and undesirable qualities. A well or properly demeaned person is what you're trying to present in everyday life. And then most importantly, good demeanor is what is required of an actor if he is to be transformed into someone who can be relied upon to maintain himself as an interacted, poised for communication, to act so that others do not endanger themselves by presenting themselves as interactions to him. So what you're basically demonstrating through demeanor is your ritual purity, that you are someone who can be trusted with the sacred thing of the self of the other, and they will receive the deference ritual and accept the self that the other is projecting onto them. Okay? So demeanor simply signifies that you are ritually pure enough and have enough integrity. Again, lean, right? This is about lean in the terms of who, in the article that we talked about in the last lecture, right? That you're safe to approach in social ways. Okay. All right. So if we just sort of again kind of get to the end of this essay, yeah. Isn't this funny? I'm looking for the end of this essay. There we go. Yeah, so let's look at this last. In this paper, I've suggested that Durkheimian notions about primitive religion can be translated into concepts of deference and demeanor, and that these concepts help us to grasp some aspects of urban life. The secular world is not so irreligious as we might think. Many gods have been done away with, but the individual himself stubbornly remains as a deity of considerable importance. He walks with some dignity in the recipient of many little offerings. He's jealous of the worship due him. Yet approaching the right spirit, he's ready to forgive those who may have offended him. All right, so we're ritually created things. So we're like mini gods walking around. We don't have the power of gods, but nevertheless, we are sacred things. We are constructed through a ritual order, and the interaction ritual is the mechanism by which that's accomplished. He ends this essay with this silly little quote, that because we need to go out into society for I like the point earlier on where we can't worship at our own altar. Here he says that each of us can serve as our own priest. That's wrong. Each of us can understand what it would take to serve as our own priest, but we can only serve as other people's priests. We cannot honor ourselves. We cannot grant ourselves ritual status. We cannot grant ourselves social recognition. Only others can do that. All right, so deference and demeanor then refer to these reciprocal social roles, social faces, one with greater power than the other, both of which enable the sacredness of the self, the participation status of the self in society to be made real and realized. And again, it's an application of Durkheim's theory of religion into the interaction order, ritual order of everyday life. Okay. The three essays then is where the action is. Kind of an odd article. Maybe before we get into it, let's just go back to the image from Deference and Demeanor, right? So Deference and Demeanor rituals, again, generally establish a rank or a hierarchy. They don't have to, but they often do. Goffman follows Durkheim in arguing that human beings are doubled, the homo duplex model of social life. And we're doubled in sacred and profane. The sacred refers to the collective or the social or the spiritual. The profane refers to the individual, the psychobiological. There's different ways to make that cut. In general, profane things can be touched, hence the body. Although, like Robert Hartz argued, the body is actually cut in half. The right hand is sacred, the left hand is profane, but we'll leave that out. But at some level, the sacred profane distinction cuts deep into social life. And so human beings are doubled and they're dealing with these two things. So in a way, what all of these articles argue is that the thing that we are in society, a social self, is distinct from and separated from our individual psychobiological being, right? So we have the existential self that presents, the existential self that is an actor, the existential self that animates social faces, and then we have the social faces themselves, the parts, the roles, and so on. These are the sacred things. We're not quite sacred. We're profane, right? We're just an organ sac, a bunch of a body, right? But the sacred thing that we are, right? The self that we are, right? That comes to us from society, literally is the direct equivalent of a soul. So in most religious traditions, you have the oversoul or the God, right? And then we have a little piece of that oversoul or God that animates us, and that is our soul in religious traditions. And Goffman's using a little bit different language again. The social face is the double of society, or at least it's the little bit of society that comes into us and then doubles us, right? So we are ritual beings that even when we're performing social roles in society and everyday life, we're ritual beings. We're beings that, again, are doubled, body and soul, body and soul. So the sacred then refers to, again, these social faces that are animated by our profane bodies, and the ritual order maintains the reality status of those faces and then keeps them sort of attached to the profane bodies. So a great example of this is Ernst Kantorowicz's great book, The King's Two Bodies. I've written about this. That the body of the king is always doubled. You have the physical body of the king who rules, and then you have the sublime body of the king who reigns, right? And that when that the crown, the orb, we should have a staff or we should have all three of the ritual signifiers of power, right? Can all be present, and then as the body of the king decays or dies and gets replaced with another body, you get a different ruler, but you get the continuation of the reign, right? So it is the king, as the sacred being who reigns, that's the sacred thing, right? That's ritually honored. The body of the king doesn't matter quite so much. Okay, so the sacred and the profane, and so on. So in the article where the action is, Goffman takes us into this strange place where he's analyzing, the behavior of people in time off. Maybe I need to do this first before we get to MIDI. Maybe I'll do this first. Okay. I've always loved James Thurber, and The Secret Life of Walter Mitty is one of my favorite articles of his. Again, another thing I think I read in high school, if I remember right, for the first time. But Walter Mitty is a man who has a problem. He is really living a boring, mundane life, and a life that is that he considers beneath him. So Walter Mitty is this man here, okay? And Walter Mitty has a body, a profane body, and he's animating a kind of boring social face or social role. It is the role of, Walter Mitty is a henpecked, I'm sorry to use that term, but and I know it's sexist and everything else, but it fits the story. I think it even comes up in the story. But he's a henpecked Fordist house husband. So a house husband of the mid 20th century, middle-aged, past middle-aged probably, and the wife is clearly the person with demeanor, and he's clearly the person who provides deference to her. So basically, his day-to-day life is just spent running his wife around. So Mitty's everyday life is consequential. He has to be the person who drives the car to take his wife around and to do her bidding and carry her shopping and that kind of thing, right? So the things he does are consequential. His life depends upon it. If he doesn't do them, he'd probably die, and she'd probably die. If he took his eyes off the road and went into the ditch, they could both be dead, that kind of thing, right? But it's not problematic. In other words, what is about to happen to Mitty in the real of his profane existence is pretty much understood, right? There's nothing chancy about it. There's no risk to his everyday life, and there's no problematic outcomes. There's no chances being taken, right? So his life is consequential, but it isn't problematic. And so in his fantasy life, Mitty imagines himself to be a Navy pilot, a millionaire banker. Let me see, a surgeon who's doing daring and heroic repair work on a like a respirator. He's an assassin who's in trial, and he's a person about to be executed. He's a bomber, right? He's doing all these different things, and this is all taking place while he's driving his wife around and helping his wife with the shopping. Really, in just this really short, 4-page short story. It's really amazing. So Walter Mitty is the guy I think that Goffman has in mind. I think that Thurber was on Goffman's mind, because what Goffman claims is that this structure is typical of the modern world. That in the modern world, we have divided life into two regions, right? Time on, time at work or time at school if you're in school, time on, time in official roles, right? That pay the bills. And then we have time off. And he claims that in traditional societies, most people probably led lives that were risky and that problematic in some way, right? That something could happen to you. If you were a farmer, you could get kicked by a mule and die, or you could get in a fight with another farmer, or you could be wrestling, trying to get your crops in and get hit by lightning, or, there's just a lot of dangers to even the life of sort of a pre-modern farmer, or a pre-modern cowboy, or a pre-modern ship captain, or virtually, lumberjack. You name your role, there's going to be some risk involved. And so we put our lives on the line and our bodies on the line many days that we go to work. The great, God, I say it now, I can't remember his name now. There's a great famous study of early modern England, and there was a computation of the death rate in the early modern period. And if you made it to, say, 21, your likelihood of dying, your probability of dying in the next year remained more or less the same from the age of 21 all the way through, say, like 80 or something like that, 75 or 80. People died not from old age, they were dying from accident and disease, and those things strike the young and the old alike. So everyday life was full of chances. They were full of chances at work, you could get hurt. They were full of chances of picking up an infection. We're in COVID. Just going outside today has some action involved in it, that kind of thing. Okay, so there's time on and time off. Time on is consequential but not problematic. And then we're going to talk about time off. Okay, so let's look at the article, and we'll come back to that image. Where the action is. Okay, so on page 163, Goffman makes the distinction between time on and time off. Guy Debord wrote the great book, Society of the Spectacle, the same year that this came out, basically. And he claims that, that boredom is a sort of essential condition of high modern Fordist life, that we're living even at our best in a totally administered state with a lot of regulations, and where time on is really heavily structured by management and by Fordist workplaces, and time off is also heavily administered, right? That there are prepackaged entertainments, and there are films that we go to, and there are roller skating rinks and those kind of things. That there's things, bowling alleys, places that have come into existence to sort of give us pre-administered, predefined, predetermined time off. Okay. So in high modernity, then, time on work was consequential, right? Your life depended upon it, and what happened in one moment affected the next, but it's not problematic. And problematic things are both fateful, meaning that you could die basically in the next moment, and let me see, they're also chancy, I think, or risky is part of it, right? They're chancy, so you're not sure of the outcome. So these are things that have tension. You're kind of nervous about things that have that are problematic, right? Because they're fateful to your life and they're chancy. Okay, and then in time off, again, things are problematic. Like you can go bowling. You're not sure if you're going to win or lose. You could yeah, they're not really, yeah, we'll get faithfulness here, but they're so you might want to lose. You could golf, you could play some other sport, you could go gambling or something. So these are problematic things, but they're not highly consequential. So time off, you try to find activities that will engage your mind and sort of make you anxious a little bit for fun, but they're not very consequential. And then when you're at work, you're doing consequential things that don't have much excitement in them. So you're bored most of the time, right? All right, so what does this mean? This means that modern people then engage in a search for faithfulness, all right? So, which has been engineered out of the world by, say the mid-20th century, okay? Like Walter Mitty. So Walter Mitty is driving a car. He's got snow tires on. He's got tire chains on. He's safe. He puts a seatbelt on. Nothing's going to happen to him. And so he's got this sort of life of boredom, right? And he lives then in a fantasy life where he's not bored, but he's exciting. All right, so some people, page 190, page 170, continue to find faithfulness at work. So there's some occupations where action, as we're going to find, is something that you find at work. Speculative, risky professions like gambling or farming or being a commercial fisherman. Physically dangerous jobs like mining or high construction work. Hustling jobs. Where you're trying to, like sales jobs, that kind of thing, where your income is really highly dependent upon successful pitches to other people. Performers like politicians, actors, and comedians who can fail in some way. Soldiers. And first responders whose lives are literally on the line, right? Criminal activity, engaging in criminal activity as a way of life, as a way to, live on the edge, find action in everyday life. And he writes about people engaging in extreme or dangerous sports as another way, right? Okay, so because everyday life is so boring then, and so administered, and so without much happening, we then have a need to find action, okay? And so I said read page 180, The Search for Practical Gambles. Yeah. I don't know what I don't know what I wanted to say here. I don't really see it on page 180. My note to myself appears to be wrong. Okay. Well, yeah, the point is that you feel detached, disaffected, and you're just killing time or awaiting time passing, and that what one wants to do is make something of time, and what one is most missing in the modern world, Goffman claims, is chances to die or chances to be harmed. So we don't have an opportunity to prove what he calls character, right? What he calls character. So we go out searching for practical gambles, things that we can engage in that are risky and dangerous, in order to prove that we are the kind of people who could hustle or who could be first responders or something. We're the kind of people who are heroic, masculine, and even, and like Walter Mitty, are more than mere people who drive their wives around shopping. Okay, so we search for practical gambles. So page 185 is where he begins to define the central terms of the book. So he talks about action. So by the term action, he says, I mean activities that are consequential. Hang on, I have one here. that are consequential, problematic, and undertaken for what is felt to be their own sake. Okay? Action seems most pronounced when the four phases of play, squaring off, determination, disclosure, and settlement, all take place at the same time. So you have this one moment where everything is determined, right? And you get a special affective state that takes place during this. You get aroused and emerging, and you become excited, that kind of thing. Okay, so then people go searching for action. So I think the best short-term or shorthand definition of action, it is simply the search for voluntary faithfulness, right? And it has to be found in avocational rather than vocational direction. So you go looking for it outside of work rather than at work. And if you do it at work, it's a side activity that's engaged in the workplace that isn't the work itself. Okay? So again, if you do high-rise construction work, you probably don't need to go find action. If you're a policeman at work, you probably don't need to go find action off of work. But if you're someone who's an accountant or a postal worker, you may be desperately needing to find action outside of work, to find excitement and so on. But it's more than just excitement, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to find ways to prove that you're a heroic masculine type. So page 193, we have become alive to action, the search for action in voluntarily chosen, fateful, dangerous, chancy situations. At the very time when we have sharply curtailed faithfulness of the serious, heroic, and dutiful kind at work, right? So we no longer can be heroes at work. How can you be a hero as an accountant, right? And so therefore you go looking for places where you can be heroic out of work. Okay, so that's time on and time off. So where is the action? So if you're the title of the essay, if you're going to go trying to find action, where do you find it? Page 194, you can find action in commercialized competitive sport. You can find it by participating in risky non-spectator sports, say like mountain climbing or something. You can go to commercial locations of action, pool halls, bowling alleys, amusement parks, fairs, places that have dangerous rides, that kind of thing, that have thrills, as he says, right? And again, what you're doing there, you're not just going to places where your life might be risked playing pool. Nobody dies playing pool. But the people who are at a pool hall tend to be people who might challenge you to a fight or who might do something that challenges your manhood. And so you might have to get into a scrap of some kind, and then that helps you get action and prove character, as we're going to find in a minute here, okay? And he claims that you can also engage in what he calls fancy milling. So what's fancy milling is where you go to a location where you find the action of consumption. So you go someplace like a fancy hotel or a fancy resort where you're spending money at a very rapid rate above your station, and where you're wearing clothes you normally don't wear and acting in ways you normally don't act, so that you're trying to mix in and fit in with a clientele who's at least one or two steps above you in the social hierarchy. And that's called fancy milling. And because you're always in danger of being found out as a mere working or middle class person, this creates the kind of action that he's talking about here. My friend Bill Swart and I wrote a book on NASCAR, Sturgis, and the New Economy of Spectacle. And we actually found that people who went to places like the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally tended to be people like accountants and keyboard jockeys, I guess, who like to engage in what's called degraded milling. So rather than going to fancy establishments, they're going and camping out at the Buffalo Chip campground outside of Sturgis, South Dakota. And instead of engaging in what Goffman called ephemeral ennoblement in a fancy place, they're engaging in ephemeral debasement, where they're pretending to be something like a simulated outlaw biker in a field for a week, right? Pretending to be an outlaw, pretending to be someone who's beneath and below bourgeois values and that kind of thing, where they can have fun all the time and drink and make loud noises and things. Anyway, so and so he gives hotel casinos as an exemplar of that. So 3 places are listed. The 4th is just reputable red light districts, in major cities. Number 5, the transformation of everyday life into action, using drugs and alcohol, engaging in self-destructive acts, gambling, on sports, politics. People do this during the workday, or doing it at night in a way that threatens your workday. So you're overlaying activities with action, your normal, everyday, boring life. Going for 3 martini lunches, that kind of thing, which I saw people do when I was an accountant. So edge work is described, right? So edge work is the transformation of normally routine activities, administered activities, into exciting action by pushing things to the edge. So gambling with more money than you can afford to lose. Engaging in auto racing, where you're driving right at the edge of crashing. Bullfighting, where you're getting as close to the bull and dancing around the bull as much as you can without killing it. Really putting yourself in as much danger as possible before stabbing the bull. Even driving on your way to work to make line, leaving too late, and then trying to make up the time so that you still arrive on time. That's edge work, transforming everyday action into the danger of being arrested or the danger of getting into a car accident, right? Using archery, not guns, to hunt animals. Use of handicapping. To making risks, pushing risky bets and so on to the limit. That kind of stuff. You can find interpersonal action. Page 207. Dueling, fighting, challenging to contest. That kind of thing is a way to find action in everyday life. And then there's that ugly section on page 209. I won't go into a lot of detail about it. I really don't like Goffman at times. I mean, I really don't. But on page 209 on, he writes about sexually harassing women at work as a way to find action. So, and he doesn't write about it in a critical way. He's writing about it as a descriptive rather than as a critique. So, I assume, if you've seen the television series Mad Men, you've seen the kind of routinized sexual harassment and that women in offices were subjected to in the 1960s. Goffman's writing the book of the 1960s. So he talks about this, and so he talks about basically using women in the workplace as a place to, as he calls it, make out. So there's about a 4 or 5 page section here, which I find extremely difficult to read. Where you're basically trying to seek out, make out, get a sexual hookup or sexual charge or something like that out of interacting with women at work to try to prove your masculinity. Again, it's basically toxic masculinity as action of the Mad Men variety. Okay, so pretty ugly stuff. My students this last time were really good about picking up on that, and then basically saying, look, Goffman's a white guy. Mid-20th century white guy, and he's writing from the perspective of a mid-20th century white guy. And, for him, everyday life is devoid of action, so you've got to go looking for it. We know from the Black Lives Matter movement that if you're a black person in America, even today, simply driving your car or walking on the street provides you with action, right? You're putting your life in danger. It's fateful, it's chancy, you're not sure what's going to happen. Every time you interact with a police officer, you're not sure what's going to happen. Every time you're walking in a park with your dog or taking photographs of birds, and some woman calls the police because she finds you dangerous for some reason, right? That you're engaging in action. Every woman who goes to workplace and gets sexually harassed at work is engaging in action, right? I mean, you're basically putting your life on the line. My students were reminding me that as they leave my classroom, women face this extra burden of attempting to make it safely to one's car without being, assaulted by one of the men that Goffman describes here as people searching for action. So, there's plenty of action in everyday life. Everyday life remains dangerous. It remains threatening for massive categories of people. Protest. Just go to a protest, a peaceful protest, and suddenly your life is full of action in ways that it shouldn't be in a democracy. So there's plenty of action out there. And so Goffman's fantasy that there is no action at work is true for him. And so he could engage in making out at work by attempting to find sexual hookups or something at work, or by sexually harassing women for the mere game of it or sport of it. But women, minorities, gay people, there's an enormous amount of action to be had just by attempting to survive everyday life, right? The attacks on trans people and so on that we've seen. And then with mass shooters out there taking aim, quite literally, at at protesters, at categories of people that they happen to not like, right? That there's plenty of action again in the everyday world. So I think he's wrong about that. And so that's a really, really ugly section. So page 214, why do people engage? Why do they go searching for action? He claims it's because they're searching for character. Okay, so we'll go back to this. So what is character? So character would be, I think, the attributes of, in the words from the last video, lean, which is the integrity of the self. So in addition to performing individual social roles, you get a reputation as a performer. And it's very difficult to get a reputation, again, as an accountant who's full of courage, right? So let's take a look at what it means to have character. To have character is a very masculinist argument, right? This would not be probably the list of character traits that women would seek, but it's courage, gameness, being up for anything, being up for a challenge, being up for a contest, being up, someone challenges you to fight, you're up for it, being game, ready to enter into any game, abandon whatever you're now to go in. Integrity, right? Being someone who follows through on a challenge once it's taken on, and so on. Composure, which includes coolness, dignity in the face of loss. Stage confidence, right? Pretending you're confident even when you're not, that kind of thing. That these are the qualities of the gunfighter, basically, or the qualities of the, the Clint Eastwood qualities of life, I suppose, right? And so his argument is that you go seeking action in everyday life because you're trying to find character. So character seems to me to be comparable to the concept of lean and mean. So you maintain lean or lose lean, that seems to me, and then you increase mean, right? So lean is the thing that you can gain or lose with integrity. Mean is the thing that you increase or decrease as you get reputation. And I think that action can refer to each of these things. But again, if you're in an everyday life, like an accountant, where you can't prove that you have a strong character of masculinity or something like that, then you engage in voluntary action activities in order to find it. And again, I know this seems silly, but this is what I studied with Bill Swart at NASCAR and at NASCAR races in a variety of locations, and at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. In both of those cases, it often isn't the official event that provides the action. It's all of these sort of subsidiary or fringe activities, the campgrounds, the infield of the racetracks, and so on, where all kinds of fancy debate or debased milling, degraded activity, fighting, drinking, that kind of stuff goes on, or at least we're in the midst of that. And so you're placing, just being in the midst of that is exciting for for your average again keyboard jockey, right? So so page 237 to page 239 is where he talks about character contests. I'm supposed to read at the XXX here. Let me do that. Page 237. Okay, so all this stuff about pride, and then it is during moments of action that the individual has the risk and opportunity of displaying to himself and sometimes to others his style of conduct when the chips are down. Character is gambled. A single good showing can be taken as representative, and a bad showing cannot be easily excused or reattempted. To display or express character, weak or strong, is to generate character. The self, in brief, can be voluntarily subjected to recreation. No doubt this license is practicable from society's viewpoint because, as clearly illustrated in connection with gamble, blah, blah, blah. So, so the voluntary taking of serious chances is a means for the maintenance and acquisition of characters, and in itself only in relation to other kinds of purposes. So it's the, and then you're trying to again engage the things that then become viewed as characteristic of you. So if you engage in a kind of heroic act in one moment, you're a hero forever. That kind of stuff. To satisfy the fundamental requirements of morale and continuity, we are encouraged in a fundamental illusion. It is our character, a something entirely our own that does not change, but is nonetheless precarious and mutable. Possibilities regarding character encourage us to renew our efforts at every moment of society's activity we approach, especially social ones, and it is precisely through these renewals that the old routines can be sustained. We are allowed to think there is something to be won in the moments that we face, so that society can face moments and defeat them. So yeah, so basically we're drawn into a character. We're committed to social rules. We engage in these gambles in order to to demonstrate our honor, our integrity, and so on, right? And then that enables the rest of the world's work to get done in some way. So page 239, he writes about character contests, where you actually, basically challenging people to fights for character in everyday life. So challenging someone to a fight in a bar or something like that, right? You lose lean, you lose face if you refuse to play, and you can gain or lose mean depending upon how the play unfolds. But there are categories of people, as Goffman writes about, for whom engaging in a fight for lean is not possible. And if you even engage in the character contest in any way, you lose lean. So, again, this is the problem of many of the politicians who debated Donald Trump, that he transformed what should have been a debate, a contest over ideas, into a character contest. It was about ripping people's faces off. And once you enter into that kind of fight, you've basically removed all dignity. And since most of these politicians had at least some remnant of shame of some kind, I think it was difficult for them to recover from the loss of lean as they refused to engage in the kind of challenge that Donald Trump threw down to them during the debate. So yeah, so if you're a lowly person, it's easy to rise during these character contests, but it's pretty easy to lose everything if you're a high status person, which is one of the reasons why high status people often don't go to the same locations as people who are on the make. All right, so page 257 there. One must be prepared to put up their lives. Yeah, there it is. One must be prepared to put up or risk your life to save your face. That's what goes on in this thing, right? So your face is your lean, and you're willing to fight to the death in order to gain a reputation for it, all right, and to prove your masculinity. Okay, so two last points. There's vicarious action in films, plays, and spectator sports. So at the end of the book, he writes about what Guy Debord does, the same kind of argument, that people often consume these moments of vicarious action, going to horror films and so on, or going to like a NASCAR race isn't actually dangerous, that dangerous for the spectator. Used to be that you'd probably die of cigarette smoke, but once that's over, not much can happen to you. But there's vicarious action on the track. People die, at least used to. And so you'd go to these events to vicariously experience action, even if you wouldn't. Same with football games and those kind of things. And so even if you're not engaged in action, you want to identify with people who are and vibrate according to that as well. And then so women and black Americans often face action every day in ways Goffman is entirely blind to. So Black Lives Matter, Take Back the Night for women, and so on, clearly has it. So one last point, in my book on Sturgis and NASCAR, we made the argument that a lot of what drives contemporary economies of spectacle is the sale of trophies. And what do trophies do? Trophies allow you to display action or character outside of the event at which it was won. So people love to buy T-shirts that display that they were at events. They love to have photographs of themselves, photo opportunities that they can display on social media or on their desk or something, so that when they're in their world of social relations back home, they can carry some of the glamour, the action, the masculinity, right? That they can show that these qualities of character, of courage, gameness, integrity, composure, were qualities that they displayed somewhere, if nowhere else at a campground outside the Black Hills. Okay, with that, we're going to let it go. So it's an interesting argument. So just to get back to this last piece then. So again, when time off roles, consequential but not problematic. Time off roles tend to be problematic but not consequential. You want to prove that you have all of these qualities of characters that Walter Mitty's henpecked mid-50s husband dreamt of possessing in his fantasy life. So you go out seeking action, right? The big question, where is the action? Because you want to find some way to get a reputation, or at least a lean for action, for those, again, those qualities that we just talked about, or even get a reputation for having excessive versions of that by engaging in risky, voluntary, fateful conduct. Okay, so in all of these essays, Goffman is playing essentially with the Durkheimian notion of homo duplex. The self that we animate in the modern world is something that is social, which means it's sacred, and therefore it is something that is generated by, sustained, fed, maintained through the ritual order. So we use the term face work to talk about some of that work. He uses interaction ritual to refer to others of it. Deference and demeanor rituals, and then in this last section, the search for action as a way to, to sort of zero in on the need to honor at least some elements of this sacred self that we're trying to project to the world, often by risking our very lives. Okay, so with that, I'll let it stop.